Hey, this is John Reed. Google Hangout on Air, trial and error style with John Appleby. We're going to find out where the heck John Appleby was while the rest of us were in Las Vegas getting our HANA fix. John, what's up, man?
I wish I knew, John. That was the problem, right?
Now you're
I
just
didn't
off.
even know.
You're just off of like a 2 hour webinar, so we're not getting the best of John Appleby right now, are we?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm good. I'm kidding. So, I wasn't there because of customer things. I wish I could come up with a great story of why I wasn't in Vegas, but it's. I guess the story goes back to the beginning of the year when I realized kind of getting Bluefin started up in the US needed us to get a good customer reference going. So this is where I started out, and that's been going on for nearly 8 months now, alongside some other work, and that kind of took priority over me going to TechEd.
Man,
Sad to
so
say.
comes down to always be closing, huh?
It comes down to customer first.
Yeah.
So
And as I think everyone would agree, we need interesting HANA use cases from customers still hungry for more stories. So, do you have a couple for us from your toils in the field?
yeah, I have a couple. The really interesting thing for me is that at the beginning of this year, I made a conscious decision to stop going after the kind of BW and HANA suite on HANA customers. There are plenty of those, and there are plenty of those live. Uh, and so we went after one very specific use case, uh, and I can only talk to it to some extent because all of the really good HANA use cases are differentiating to a market, and therefore the customer really doesn't want anyone to know about them.
I'll sign
Uh,
an NDA. That
yeah. Anyone that wants to watch this now has to sign an NDA, right? I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. But I can say that it's in financial services, and it's sufficiently interesting that the people in the project know that it will change their market. So it will redefine their market over the next 10 years.
well, let me put it to you in a few different ways. Then one thing is I've always felt that the real value in HANA is in the industry applications,
Yeah.
but at the same time, we know that some of the early HANA projects had real troubles with taking on huge scope, and one of the reasons we moved towards BW on HANA and those kinds of projects was because these elaborate custom projects just got bogged down. Is that a fair assessment, and how are you addressing that?
Well, yeah, now you're putting me on the spot. But
Well, that's the whole point, right?
oh yeah, that's why we're on a live broadcast. Oh yeah. I'd say first of all, you and I have been in the boardroom at SAP on a couple of these conversations, and that was TechEd not last year but the year before in Vegas when that really kicked off. And HANA was a new database. I love that they called it new DB. It was fresh to the market. There were enormous amount of bugs 2 years ago. It didn't scale out, and it's come a long way. Is the first thing, and the time is right for those industry apps. Um, and I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is we know a lot more about what HANA's good and bad at, and we took that into account. It's still a relatively new database when you compare it with the oracles that have been around for 20 years. But that's the beauty of it. And if I take really the elements that make this app a success, it's the ability to use the whole platform. So we don't just use HANA. HANA's part of the story. We have a stream processor, the event stream processor, CEP, to do real-time information. We're doing historic lookups asynchronously in real time in HANA, and we're doing federation out to a cold store like Sybase IQ, right? And it's not that cold; it's pretty warm. So those components make up the data platform story, and the way in which we put them together. And the real key thing is real time and historic lookups in real time. That's the real killer. The way we do that, you can't do it in another product. We did a vendor comparison of 12 different vendors, and the other vendors aren't able to do that stuff.
John, I thought financial services had been sort of a pioneer in real time based on obviously the demands of the financial markets for instantaneous information. Is that not true, or were there just areas that are still untouched?
No, that's true. So most financial services companies have got one or more technologies to deal with the real time. Most of them bought into a technology vendor called KDX, which is an offshoot of one of the major banks. And most of them have got historic stores. They've got Teradata and a Teaser, a Sybase IQ, or probably all of them. The problem is that when the kind of problems that they want to solve today combine the needs of the real-time engines and the needs of the historic engines into one, into all the use cases they want to do, combine both of those technologies, and they're very difficult to combine as separate stacks. So yeah, they've all got this, but this is doing things in new ways.
So how do you go about this process of identifying an industry need? Is there an initial dialogue with the customer, like a pain point that they identify? Are you developing an application that you can customize for other use cases with other customers in the industry? Like, what is your process for doing that?
I got two different processes for doing it, and I've actually got another use case that we can, again, I can't talk about it because it's same problem.
Yeah.
But the first case is actually this financial services customer. They came to us and they said, listen, we got a problem that we think HANA can solve, and we kind of want to be first to solve it. They wanted to lead their industry. So that's one way around, and you know, Bluefin, my organization, we help people with that problem. The other way around, it happened just the other way around in healthcare last week, where I had a meeting just randomly with a friend of my brother's who runs a healthcare organization, and he said, we have an idea and it's this, and I said, well, hell, HANA's going to do that idea a lot better than any other technology, and it's going to solve this problem, this problem, and this problem. And he said, oh. But it has to start with somebody that knows an industry and sees the pain in an industry. If you don't have that, then you're a solution looking, or a solution looking for a problem. Yeah, that way around.
Yeah. So have you also been kicking and screaming into the big data hype and kicking tires on Hadoop clusters and MapReduce and things like that? Is that part of what you have to bring to the table now, or?
Yeah. I mean, so you know, my title is a HANA title, but it's I hate the phrase big data. It's overused, but it characterizes the way the industry is headed.
I feel like I lose a year off my life every time I say the phrase big data. I don't know why. It scares me to use it, but
yeah, kittens are on the way out. If not your life, then kittens' lives. Yes, I mean, in the scenario in financial services we're talking about, there is a Sybase IQ style cold store, because it's all about aggregated information. Pretty soon there'll be a Hadoop cluster there as well. For batch processing, for text information, social information, news feeds, it's all going that way. And actually, our data platform story it includes Hadoop.
So is it necessarily big data, or is it just simply data that the enterprise has never reckoned with before?
I think we see two major styles of use case. One is this, again, the first use case I mentioned. There are hundreds of terabytes of compressed data. It's petascale in its nature, the end-to-end solution. And I'd call that big data, if you like, or whatever you want to call it. The other end of the platform, and it's actually another use case that I've been building out. It's actually all about reusability. So one of the problems, and you get this really badly with like an Oracle database. Actually, I've just been recording some stuff for SAP on this. But if you want to build a little Oracle thing, so you build a platform, and then you want to load into it in real time, so you build a load more stuff, and then you want to do some analytics, so you build a load more stuff, and then you want to do some data mining, so you're building more stuff, and all of a sudden you're out past the edge of the camera, and then you want to add some spatial, and then you take some more copies of the data and you build shadow tables and you build more and more complexity into what you're doing. What we found with HANA is you get the opposite. So where you have like mid-sized data volumes, you know, millions or millions of records, hundreds of millions, you can continue to build out apps on the same platform over and over. You build a web app, you build an analytics app, you build access for data mining, you integrate spatial, and every time you integrate, you kind of, it's like you're baking a cake, you're folding over more air into it, and you're solving more problems, and you're sweating the asset. And that's kind of the other side of what we're seeing. I'm making sense.
Yeah, and I like how you slipped in that Oracle bashing in the process there.
I think I've just been tuned to do this over the last couple of months.
I guess. I thought Oracle was pretty good at data.
When it comes to solving these sorts of problems, no. And actually, really interestingly, in the last project I worked on, Oracle didn't make the long list or the short list. Lots of interesting technologies that did.
Well, for you Oracle fanboys and fangirls, sorry we don't have a rebuttal witness in this interview, so you'll have to follow up with me later for that. This is an open invitation to anyone who believes you can do the same kinds of projects with Oracle technologies to approach me in your free time. So John, I want to ask you about this whole thing around bringing in new sources of data. I had a interesting contrast from year to year because I went to this controlling conference, SAP Controlling 2013, and we helped put this conference on. It's one of my clients every year. And last year, people were kind of just figuring out HANA in the very basic way. This year, I had a couple customers with more advanced use cases, and one of them said to me, I want to talk with someone at SAP about how we're going to pull our sensor data into, our decision-making processes and into our analytics engines and stuff, which is obviously a HANA use case. Is this also part of what's happening now as you're looking at these new sources of data that have really historically been sort of, I guess you could say, siloed from decision-making and siloed from the ability to make sense of it?
Yeah, and actually it's another use case that's just landed on my desk to start with today, is exactly that. Another one I can't talk about. Here we go.
Oh, man.
Around.
Welcome to our NDA discussion, folks.
Welcome to our NDA discussion of what we can't talk about. No, and this one's really interesting because it's all about decision making within HANA. So it's all about yield management, in fact, and pushing that decision making process into the HANA engine. I think we're going to see that, by the way, with the SAP install base as well. Those people that move onto the business suite on HANA, we'll see them building out more and more of these little side apps, these little sidecar apps within their memory platform. I'm interested to see what SAP's story, because they've obviously done their business suite on HANA. I'd love to see how that looks for them. What are you seeing?
Well, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of interest in proof of concepts, and what I'm hoping to see a little more of is the ability for customers to get their feet wet with some of these projects without making huge upfront investments to kind of test scenarios more. And I thought the Amazon Cloud BW instance is a good example of stepping more in that direction of giving people trials to sort of see what the potential is. But I do think there's definitely this light bulb that's going off as far as that there's all this data that can help me make better decisions that I've never taken into account before. And I think that's a lot more interesting discussion than, oh, how can I make my ERP system like 10% faster, or how can I make my BW system 20% faster? I just don't think that's a very interesting conversation for most companies. But this whole thing around like, well, if I can take geolocational data into account when I'm making decisions around retail stocking, for example, right? Or if it's a law enforcement thing, I'm taking in feeds, because we talk about this API economy that's out there, right? Where more and more companies and organizations are releasing via APIs access to data that you can then build applications upon.
Yeah.
and that can also be pulled into HANA-based scenarios. And to me, that gets really interesting. I think where I think where customers want a little more is around more out of the box, right? Because custom projects are cool, but they can be pretty involved. And if you can give me an app that I can customize to my needs, that's already like 2/3 built for my industry, then I think it gets pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just quickly on your 2 points on what you said on the first piece. A little thing that I'm doing in my spare time is I've found that there are lots of interesting public reference data sets. I think the most interesting one is NOAA's, NOAA's hourly climate information. Actually, I was just doing a little count on that now. I've got how many? Yeah, so about 2 billion climate data points since 1901, data points that NOAA has access to around the world. I think there'll be about 2.5 billion by the time I finish processing it. So I downloaded all of their data since 1901 and processed it to run into HANA. And so we can do geospatial analysis in the first instance on things like climate change. But if you think about just the commercial implications of that from a reference data perspective, all of a sudden, if I'm a retailer, I can use NOAA data to see what the temperature was at time of transaction, or the precipitation was at time of transaction across all my transactions. And presumably, I can predict from that what people are going to buy, so I can reduce stock out. And I think that comes back to your, well, it really kind of deals with both your points, right? Which is, first of all, that that API economy of reference data is really powerful, and second, I think it's always been about the apps.
Yeah, there's been a very interesting discussion going on at SAP events and with some of the leadership around, do you emphasize more an applications marketplace approach for new apps? Because obviously a lot of the startup community, a lot of the partners are developing interesting HANA applications. Do you team up with SAP salespeople and go to market in a more conventional way, or do you push applications marketplaces? And I don't know that there's one or the other answer to that question. My feeling is you kind of do both, but that it's an interesting debate because it kind of brings to light what are companies looking for and how are they going to purchase and consume applications in the future, you know? And HANA's kind of a proving ground for that right now, I think.
I think it's fascinating, and I think the biggest problem by far is the question is who's building the apps.
Yeah.
I don't think SAP understands yet who is building the apps. SAP wants to build the apps. It wants people to build the apps. It wants customers to build the apps. Sometimes it wants people to build industry-changing apps. Well, an industry-changing app needs to be driven by one customer, and then the industry will follow. You can't commoditize the uncommoditizable. And by the way, I'm not saying I have the answers, but I think that solving those is really important. If you want your ecosystem to build the apps, then you need to make sure you don't compete against them. Otherwise, they ain't going to build them. And you know, all of these problems, I think, are complex.
Yeah, definitely. So this question, I thought you kind of crystallized this thing around figuring out what HANA is really good at and where HANA is not as good. It's kind of interesting because I talked with a startup in Vegas, and I asked them, well, how did you get involved with SAP HANA? And they said, well, you know, we already knew a lot about big data from open source communities and Hadoop and such, and we came to a startup event where Vishal Sikka went up, and he kind of more in a fairly dispassionate way kind of showed, here's what HANA is good at, here's what MongoDB is good at, here's what Hadoop is good at, and they were really impressed by laying that out in kind of a, I guess objective's kind of a strong word, but you know what I mean, like just kind of a pros and cons kind of thing, and that sort of earned a lot of trust, and I kind of welcome that from SAP because, or really almost any vendor really, it doesn't have to be SAP, but basically being able to, I think you win a lot of trust from customers when you're honest about what you're good at and what you're not, as opposed to saying we're good at everything right now. So I'm kind of curious about that from your perspective, with if you think that is a good approach and you know how that applies to HANA, because sometimes if your product has a set of weaknesses. Some of those you desperately need to improve, like maybe, in the early days it was disaster recovery, things like that. But other things you might not need to improve as much as have complementary products that fill those gaps, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say kind of, first of all, slightly off topic to what you asked. I was out to dinner with a friend the other night, and he works in telecommunications, and he's a programmer, let's say. And we were talking about HANA, which is a great thing on a Friday night, right? It's like I work it all week, and here we go. But
sounds really fun.
But he was fascinated because he'd never heard of it, and he immediately saw applications for his problems. And it's the first thing is that really getting that message isn't out there to the people that really matter, the people who are, and this guy's super smart. People are smart enough to solve those problems. They don't know this thing exists still in many cases. I just wanted to throw that out there. I know that didn't answer your question. What was your question again? It was around.
Well, just this whole thing around kind of more objectively saying here's what works, here's what doesn't, and then when you take a step back and say, well, some of these things we need to fix, but some of these things, if other products do them better, we can create a complementary ecosystem, right? Instead of solving everything ourselves.
Yeah, customers love honesty. Unfortunately, honesty doesn't always sell software.
Yeah.
There is, marketing people they're selling the vision that's 6 months out because by the time it's sold, it'll be there. Yeah. Consultants want to sell what you can deliver now because they want a successful project. The software ecosystem is always it's tearing itself apart in this way. And I think what you saw with Vishal, hats off to the guy for doing that, because I don't think a lot of software salespeople do. Right. Not that he's in software sales, of course. But yeah, when you do that, you do get trust from customers, and I'll always try and say what a product does well. I mean, and the main thing I say is if you've got a box like here, an Oracle, let me get that to the camera, an Oracle fits inside this box. If you go and put HANA in that box, and you go and replace your business suite with HANA, then you're going to end up with a box. And that's kind of that's my first thing is if you don't want to innovate with the HANA platform, and with the suite customers, it's things like HANA Live for operational reporting, or it's additional use cases, and then starting to sweat the value out of it. If you don't want to do that, HANA ain't going to give you any value. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. If you're not looking for value, you won't get it. And I had this another financial services customer, and this was a risk management platform, and they said, right, we want a data store for risk management, a transactional data store. And we saw very quickly, because they painted the solution they wanted into a box, HANA was going to be no better than a bunch of other databases. And actually, in some ways, it's worse because it's a bit less, at that time, 2 years ago, it was less mature from an enterprise perspective. And even today, when HANA is very mature from an enterprise perspective, what's the benefit if you're not looking for it?
So if I was your unwitting, naive customer, and you were in front of me, what would you say are the real strengths of HANA at this point, and what's an area or two where it needs to improve still?
Well, I think what you need to do is look across your business, right? There are areas of your business where you just want them to run, and there are areas of your business where you want to innovate. And you're going to spend where you want to innovate, and you're going to consolidate those run assets. And I would say look to invest in HANA where you want to innovate predominantly. That is where, as a business, you will change. If you focus as a business on the run, then you're going to make your business run more efficiently. And I'm not saying that HANA can't help there. It can to some extent. But you're going to be focusing your innovation funds on making your business run purely more efficiently. Instead, focus on where the innovation is, wherever that might be. And for every industry, it's different, right?
Sure. And would you say that the strengths around innovation would come down to things like real-time, third-party data mashups, predictive? Are there different components? I mean, we've hashed out a number of them today. Are there just are those kind of the key ones that come out, or are there others? Or?
I think the main thing that you get is this wonderful simplicity. And I've been doing some comparisons with other things out in the market. And with HANA, you have it starts off, this is a sort of story I tell you, you have one installer, and that installer takes 5 minutes to run, and it gives you a HANA platform. It gives you an application platform, and that platform includes all of the core data stuff, the storage and the ACID stuff and the database. It includes all of the plumbing to get information in and out. It includes the engines. It includes a text engine, a graph, well, soon to be a graph engine. It includes a spatial engine, a predictive engine. All of these engines then sit within that platform. It includes an integration layer, so you can get stuff in and out in real time. And it includes an application services layer where you have a web application layer all built in. That's all done in one installer in 5 minutes. And if you look at what other vendors need for that, they need 5 different servers, setup, configuration, days or weeks of configuration. That's all done in one time. And that simplicity is what allows you to build the apps.
Well, John, even though you missed Vegas, it seems like you are in lockstep with SAP's platform message that they emphasized in Las Vegas, to the joy of platform Krishnas like myself, and to the alarm of those who are more closely tied to what they consider realities of how customers think today.
The world's changing. That's my view. I don't know, man. So where did we get with? Did we manage to keep people out of this group chat?
Well, all I know, John, is either they weren't allowed to come in or they opted out of coming in. I can't tell you. I'm pretty sure they can't come in since I didn't invite them, but they could have posted a question. But as you know, I recently in my presentation at TechEd about social media, I compared Google Plus to a treehouse, where you and a couple of your buddies hang out. So it's not that likely that someone's going to knock on the door of your treehouse. So
no, it'd be nice if they did, though, right?
Well, I think in many ways, I think it's the best social platform when you take into account features like the Hangout that we're doing now. But if you don't have critical mass, then it becomes a real problem. So
yeah, we'll see what Google does with that. It's been a pretty good place to record this video, so.
Yeah, I think so. I guess we should just look to head towards a wrap here.
Yeah.
As far as this, I think like to get a couple of your thoughts on this sort of thing around database versus platform. I think HANA can definitely be both. I think a lot of customers aren't really aware of the platform part yet. I like the message for developers because I think platforms appeal to developers, but there seems to be a lot still to be resolved. Like if someone like Dick Hirsch, who follows his stuff so closely, can't figure out the differences between the HANA Enterprise Cloud and the HANA Cloud Platform, it raises eyebrows in terms of where we go from here.
I think that
no insult to Dick, by the way. Dick, you're doing an awesome job figuring out as much as you can, but it is what it is.
I think I don't think that's a bad thing right now, and I'll tell you why. There are 1,000 teams, 1,000 people, 1 million developers working on the HANA thing. I'm exaggerating, but there are lots of different teams, and quite often there, as is often with a software company, different teams doing the same thing. And we're seeing that with the HANA Cloud Platform, the Enterprise Cloud, the HANA Cloud Platform, Enterprise Cloud. It reminds me a little bit of Monty Python's Life of Brian, the People's Liberation Front of Judea. If you remember this, anyway, the Brits will remember.
Yes, I wish we could run a clip right through, but I think we have trademark violations. So
anyway, there's 3 different groups of people. They're all different activist groups, all with the same purpose, all with very similar names, and it's a little bit like that sometimes. That then becomes survival of the fittest. And at this stage of the product evolution, some of that's good because it creates healthy competitive stuff going on. And that's really good. I think, though, it has to come out the back of that quite quickly now. I think SAP needs to decide what the strategy is. And actually, this is the elephant in the room that we didn't discuss, which is the move towards subscription license models. I mean, SAP's core revenue is on the decrease, and its HANA revenue is massively up year on year. I mean, nearly 100% year on year. It's a $1 billion run rate business. But you can only buy it on-premise effectively. I mean, you can buy it in the cloud, but you've got to go and buy an on-premise license. So the real question for me next year is, how do they move to a model which is monetizable in the cloud that people are going to buy? And I think that's interesting.
And there's also some tantalizing, interesting questions which came up a little bit in the whole by design PR fiasco and discussion around. Started to think about, well, yeah, you couldn't like lock 10,000 developers in Waldorf anymore and redo the business suite. But what if you picked certain areas and started rewriting, but not trying to capture all the functionality, but focusing more on user experience, building on a HANA platform, having a Fiori-like front end, and rethinking the role of the user? And what if you started in more of an iterative process, putting that kind of stuff out there? There's some really interesting things that we could hear more about, I think, in the next year or two, as far as how SAP can revitalize some of its core applications. It'd be very interesting to watch.
Well, reading between the lines, I assume that's happening. I'm sure you read Hasso has started blogging, and he's kind of getting into his stride now, and he's developing his style, which I think is quite fun. And if you read in between the lines of his blogs, SAP's rewritten core financials to not use a ledger style, and I think in a similar way to what Workday have done, right? Because the reason why we have general ledgers is to store information in human readable format, not because we need it in that format. Computers in theory just need transactions, provided you can aggregate fast enough. And the implication that I understand is that they've written the data model for financials without ledgers, and all the ledgers being virtualized and built on the fly. And I presume they're building that out.
Yep.
That's just I don't have any inside information. I just read that between the lines.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be an interesting story to watch, because now the market rules have changed, so you don't have to reduplicate all your old functionality anymore. You can almost throw a lot of that out the window, right, and start thinking about how people do business in a networked economy and start writing smaller applications for that, which is totally different than the by design approach originally, right, which was to invest a huge amount in a comprehensive product and toil away at it and then take it to market. Whereas in this case, you're talking about more iterative releases of smaller applications, and it's just a whole different approach. It will be interesting to see if it succeeds or not, but at least it's a different way of going to market, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and you combine that with subscription pricing, right? So the two are connected.
Well, you have to, right? And I think two things on that. I mean, first of all, it's easy with 2020 hindsight to see that the by design model didn't work, and SAP invested a significant amount of money.
Yep.
I don't think they could have known to get that right second time around, but I think that they already did get it right though on the cloud, because you just have to look to Employee Central, and that in its first release that was pretty light, and it seems to get a little stronger with each release. And I was talking briefly to Jarrett earlier on today, and he was saying that he was involved in a pretty substantial Employee Central core HR rollout at a big customer. So if they're going up against Workday on that stuff and they're winning, then I guess they're getting something right.
Well, it's something to watch, and as we wrap up this free-flowing discussion, which, by the way, to our listeners, we had really no notes, so I don't know where we went exactly, but the Amsterdam's taking place now, but I think the TechEd that will be really interesting to watch is Bangalore, only because Amsterdam is coming so soon after Las Vegas that it's going to be, I think, fairly similar messaging, but Bangalore, I think, should be very interesting. It's still another month out, and I know there's a lot happening, so it'll be interesting to check on that.
Yeah, we have the mooted HANA-as-7 release, which has been announced. That's and I think there'll be some interesting things coming out of that as well.
All right, John.
There we go.
I think we hit it, man.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I'm done, man.
Okay, dude. Let's stop. Thanks for joining us.